Hello all. Time to discuss a more sensitive and hotly debated topic. I suspect that it is only so because of the massive misinformation campaign and fear-mongering that goes on nowadays, and so I feel that this is a good time to bring some more light to this distorted topic, to hopefully help those who know in their subconscious that progressive taxation is justified, to possibly better express their feelings on the matter against the fearmongers and the straw men arguments. Despite what the fearmongers may say, everyone being paid the same is not what most people are advocating for when they call for progressive taxation. I think that most people would agree, in principle, that everyone is entitled to get the rewards for their own labour. So how much can one person really achieve on their own, without the help of others, even if they are smarter, stronger, and harder working? The answer is, not a lot. As individual hunter-gatherers, there are hard limits to what your additional efforts and intelligence can do for you in comparison to others. Most of your time is just spent on surviving, after all. It is only as part of a society that we can leverage off of the support of others to make better use of our own advantages, and that is what people do, and it benefits all. Good for us. As this benefits all to a large degree, the relative reward for one person's greater effort, as compared to others, will also proportionally increase as the advantage for all increases by being part of a society, and that's good. But as the complexity of society increases, so do the opportunities for system imbalances, deliberate or otherwise, to begin to distort the amount of reward that an individual receives from interactions with others, as compared to their compatriots who put in similar efforts. People may say that manipulating the system imbalances to your own advantage utilizes superior intellect, and that you deserve that additional reward for yourself. But they would not be in a position to manipulate the system imbalances without the help of society, because without society there would be no system imbalance to manipulate to their advantage. The ultra-rich could never create such material wealth on their own, or maintain it on their own. Similarly, innovators would not have the time and resources to develop their innovations without the help of society to support them. There is an implicit debt in all cases of extreme wealth. Society gifts you this wealth, these skills and opportunities, because without society it would be worth almost nothing. This goes well beyond just paying their way directly. It is all of the things you don't pay for, but should, or didn't pay enough for, or your forefathers. Any disproportionate reward generated from system distortions or imbalances comes at the cost of society in general. Legal or not, this is morally indefensible. And let's be honest, many things that were legal in days gone by, and even today, are and were morally indefensible. So where is this line where you can point to and say that someone's reward and wealth beyond this amount in an interaction is mostly due to society imbalances or distortions, and not their own efforts? Who knows? And trying to pin it down would be pointless, as this distortion is not just between these two parties, but to millions of parties throughout all of time. So there is no point in trying to break it down into activities or professions, for example. This just allows the rich to complicate things unnecessarily when the solution is so much simpler. The main thing is to understand that once a person's wealth and acquisition reaches massively disproportionate amounts, it is obvious to even the layman that the majority of the wealth must be due to a system imbalance advantage, and not their efforts alone, regardless of the circumstances of how they got their wealth or reward. So it is perfectly morally defensible to ask them to give a reasonable significant proportion of it back to society if their accumulation has become massively excessive. Even for someone who has always paid their way, there is an implied debt to society, and once their reward suddenly exceeds all relation to their efforts due to an advantage that the system brings, the point of how they got their wealth becomes null and void. However they got it, their efforts alone could not have achieved this, so it is only fair to balance the distortion back to those who were disadvantaged by this distortion, directly, and, more importantly, indirectly. All of society, yes, all of society, evenly, as attempting to ration out would be too fraught with interpretation and abuse. So here we have the general moral reasoning for justifying progressive taxation systems, not only on income tax, but also for general wealth tax. Now on to shedding some light onto the most common arguments against progressive taxation. So, tax the rich. Sounds easy enough. A main tactic of the fearmongers is to manipulate the term rich so that any discussion of taxing the rich, in truth often nothing more than progressive tax, sounds like arguments for socialism. Progressive taxation, particularly income tax, have been and still are a common form of taxation in the leading capitalist countries on earth. Not only that, progressive taxes were often significantly higher during the start-up and first halves of the various golden ages of capitalism of many of these countries. Their lowering also sometimes foreshadowed the end of these golden age periods, instead of being a knee-jerk reaction to it. Progressive taxes do not equal the USSR, and it doesn't automatically cripple capitalist growth as many may have you believe. The second argument is that its implementation or re-implementation would result in a worse situation for the average person. Wealth flight, or capital flight, as it is often called, is a common argument. This is a failure of policy, not of the idea. If this is the main argument, then all is mostly lost, because the logic is that you have to pander to the wealthy into enticing them to invest. Well, guess what? They don't want to pay taxes. They want to multiply their wealth, often not caring about the consequences to others, and they want to take no risk, privatization of profits and nationalization of losses, which is exactly what is causing the problem and continues to distort the situation. Instead, implement the policies and work from the top down. Set policies to close loopholes and aggressively go after targeted perpetrators if they take moves to damage the economy. Just netting the 100,000 wealthiest for redistribution would have a massively disproportionate benefit. What is missing is the will, not the means. It will be a bumpy ride if it comes to that, but there are ways and means to ensure that those doing the right thing are protected, while those who are not go punished. Even if some of the ultra-wealthy are willing to take the massive losses involved in dumping currency to punish the government and the people, there is no way to beat a determined government. They make the rules, Emergency Bank Act, etc. And if push comes to shove, they control the currency, all the way up to a creation of a new currency. This is simply a transfer of funds at the end of the day. True wealth production comes from physical capital, skills and labour. Money is only a means. This physical and intellectual infrastructure will continue to deteriorate in many sectors of the first world until the issues are resolved. It's society's choice as to when the majority cannot tolerate their deteriorating living conditions anymore. The sooner the better for everyone. I think now is a good time to have a few approximate guideline values for a reasonable progressive tax and wealth tax, but far more importantly than the value themselves, mostly picked to be able to give an example, I will state the advantages and disadvantages of various combinations and extremes. So firstly, progressive income tax. As we are trying to avoid only swapping one centralized power for another again, most people should only be lightly taxed at a relatively flat rate. For a small government, only the uppermost fraction of income distribution should be very heavily taxed. Say everything above about 20 times the average yearly income should be very heavily taxed. For example, if the average was 30k, then only people earning more than 600k a year and above would be very heavily taxed. Everything below this point should be a relatively flat, moderate to low tax to assist the innovators, with a possible negative income tax to assist the poor, or equivalent. Tying these values to a multiple of the average income is a nice feedback loop for everyone wanting to be even richer. You have to make everyone else richer at the same time. This would need some tweaking in very low income countries, but anything approaching double the suggested values of 20 times should be viewed with skepticism. Considerably more important than the income tax is the wealth tax. Again, I would base this on a multiple of the average median wealth for a country, say between 200 times the median wealth for affluent countries to 1,000 times the median wealth for third world ones. Seems to generate a very generous sum for innovative thinkers and job-creating industrialists to fulfill their dreams and create jobs. Above the upper limit point of wealth, everything is taxed at rates approaching 100%. So if the median wealth is 20k for the 1,000 times example, then the limit before max wealth tax would kick in would be about 20 million. Everything below the top value is only lightly taxed down to 100 times the average median wealth, where it disappears to zero. The point is that only the disproportionately very rich get heavily taxed. This avoids crippling the benefits of capitalism by still getting enough capital into the hands of competent people to benefit society. This also avoids any moral hazards, as only those obviously receiving a system advantage are targeted. For the suggested values of wealth not to be abused to the detriment of society, it must be ensured that this wealth is not held as land purely for the sake of renting. Residential land ownership should be restricted to between 2 and 5 dwellings, including their own, with total rental income from all land not exceeding 2 times means average income and total worth of land not exceeding 100 times the median wealth. Similarly, indirect investment of wealth through a third-party financial institution should be limited to 100 times the median wealth, with income generated by this capped at 2 times average income. The point here being that both of these forms of wealth and wealth generation are almost entirely generated from the society and the systems of society. An individual person would not have the ability to rent or loan anything without a society there to rent to. A person directly investing their wealth into a local non-financial institution, services and manufacturing for example, being the conditional exception to this additional rule, as this is a reasonable valuable function of capitalism, and most importantly, it invests the money back into production and services, preferably locally. The whole point of this is twofold: to allow enough flexibility for the benefits of private enterprise to flourish with enough restraint to ensure that the excesses do not rear their ugly head. A balance. And as we have seen, this is not only better from a functional point of view, but a moral one. Concentration of power, financial and political, is simply not only morally unjust, but eventually causes its own downfall, leading to misery for the masses. Humanity has realized this with governments and has attempted to develop systems to keep their power in check, with various degrees of success. It has become apparent that this is also necessary to develop a system to keep the power of accumulated money in check as well. So from this you can tell that it would be preferable for the large majority, say 90% and above, of recovered wealth and income tax of the highest bracket to be evenly redistributed to all other citizens as a tax return and not held by the government. Even if some of them just blow it, as some of the rich would say, at least this returns the money into the wider economy as consumption. The more evenly spread the wealth is, the greater demand for goods and services, and there is only so much the mega rich can consume. This also leads on to more diverse and far-reaching investment, growth, and ultimately jobs, a positive feedback loop. Capitalism works best when the benefits are spread across the largest group of people as possible, thus increasing the chance of encouraging and enabling future entrepreneurship and innovation. To summarize, any economic interaction we undertake in society between two parties often carries within it an advantage for one of those two parties, an indirect advantage given to them by the society. The unfathomable intricacies of the complex intertwining systems of society, often indirect ones, makes it utterly pointless to try and even attempt to place a fair value on each interaction individually. It's enough to say that when you inherit something, when you invent, sell, buy, earn, lead, manage, better yourself, or do anything that requires interaction of any kind, it is society allowing you to do this, not just the people you meet, but all of society, all the time, that allows you this ongoing benefit. To avoid a witch hunt and infinite legislation, if someone is able to utilize the legal system to get rich, well, congratulations! There is no point in trying to deconstruct their acquisition to try and determine what percentage was due to talent and what part was purely down to system advantage. The partial exception to this being rent and indirect loans, as discussed above. Just know that at a reasonably noticeable point, as discussed above, it becomes obvious to everyone that talent alone can no longer be the primary reason for the massive acquisitions, and it's the distortion of the system that gives them the majority of their disproportionate winnings. And at this point you can take it back and redistribute it to all of society without fear of moral hazard. This is done not only because it is morally correct to redistribute system imbalances, but it is practically necessary to avoid the system endangering effects caused by centralist power and or centralized wealth. I hope this brought some interesting perspectives and was able to assist those who potentially could not express it so easily against a determined fear campaign we face. All the best, everybody.